My name's Jibril Osman. Pleasure to get you on Studio One. It's a platform I created to really interview artists that I personally really wanted to interview. Having my own publication, allows me to do that. The focal point is, I interview international acts like yourself, acts across Canada, and of course, more importantly, acts in Toronto to really highlight artists in the city where I'm from. So it's amazing to get you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we begin, can you briefly just introduce yourself and then we'll get started?
Yeah. Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Paul Klein, and I am in the band LANY, and we're here today talking to Jibril.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, before we really get into music, how have you been doing, with the quarantine and, COVID or wherever you are in the world? How has it been for you beyond music?
I think it's probably been similar to how it's been for everybody. I think probably growing pretty restless at this point, and it is what it is, and trying to make the most of it and stay positive, but definitely looking forward to this being over for sure.
Yeah, cool. Now, on that note, can you please, tell me about, where you grew up and when did, because we all love music, but, for you, when did it become this realization for you that this was something you wanted to pursue as a career, like when do you have that moment in your life?
So I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, basically the middle of nowhere. My mom put me into classical piano when I was 5 years old. It wasn't really a discussion. It was just like, you're going to study classical piano and this is your life. So I did that for 13 years. I started studying jazz when I was like 13 years old. And I really fell in love with like John Mayer in middle school.
Yeah.
And became obsessed with like his songs and songwriting. And growing up playing piano wasn't cool. Like that's not a cool thing to do. I was going to like classical piano competitions on my weekends, and like didn't tell anyone about that because that's not something that you brag about. But I remember seeing Alicia Keys, MTV Unplugged at an early age, and that was the first time I realized that piano could be cool. And then Chris Martin really kind of completely changed my life, like with Coldplay, and seeing how a frontman could be so magnetic and charismatic behind a piano. So I would say that all of that was my kind of musical inspiration. And yeah.
And speaking of MTV Unplugged, I can help but notice the Nirvana MTV Unplugged, which is one of my, I think it's my favorite actually, just amazing. So as you kind of grew into realizing that you wanted to make music, talk to me about how the band came together. And I know when bands have the early songs, it's not as good. You're kind of figuring out your ways. What song, if there is a song that you guys have, where you guys realized this is as close as we are to what we really want to sound like in the beginning? Do you have one song that kind of was like, oh, we found something?
It's a good question because, technically, so we wrote and recorded our first two songs and put them on the internet to 0 people and 0 followers. Yeah. And within a week we had emails from record labels, which is really bizarre and rare. And, so, it's not that those two songs were like, oh, this is what we want to sound like. It was just, it was because we were doing it ourselves on the Dell computer, but I don't think we realized, I'm not sure if there is a sound and a goal of like, we want to sound like. I think as long as we're always progressing and evolving and changing. But I Love You So Bad was a song for us that was like, okay, I think we're actually a band. Yeah. And that was the third song we ever wrote as a band. And that song, propelled us forward into songs like Pink Skies and Super Far and 13. Like those are some early cuts that have now kind of feel like classics, and there's some songs during that era that I'm really embarrassed of too, that are just, I think are terrible. And and I'm allowed to say that because I wrote them.
Exactly.
And anybody can say that.
Yeah.
But I do think that like a couple years ago, I was obsessed with wanting to be the biggest band in the world or the best band in the world. But that's completely objective. You know, you'd ask 10 people who's the best band in the world, they'd have 10 different answers.
Yeah.
But you know what? I really do think that we're the most improved band in the world. I really mean that. I think if you go back and listen to our early stuff, which was just 4 years ago, up against a song like You on Mama's Boy, that's not even the same band.
Yeah.
Like the growth is astronomical. It's exponential. And we've worked really, really hard to grow and get that much better over that little time.
Speaking of growth, because I was going to touch upon the new album later in the interview, but because you brought it up, you guys have done so much in this certain amount of years, you know, whether it's EPs, you know, the albums and touring. Have you guys allowed, because it seems you guys have kind of allowed yourself to kind of reflect more and to see how much you've grown. Have you really, because it sounds like it, but have you been able, with quarantine as well, have you been able to reflect on everything you guys have done? Because with the new album, there's kind of this return to roots.
I think there's definitely moments where you're like, wow, we played a lot of shows and we've reached a lot of people. But to be honest with you, no, one thing that I'm not very good at is celebrating anything. And maybe I should get better at it. But at the same time, like, you know, that kind of keeps us moving forward. And it's interesting, man. Like when we first started this band, a lot of artists that we were like side by side with, they're not even around anymore.
Yeah.
And
that has to be
there's certain bands that just took too much time off between albums and they just lost it. Yeah. And that's one of our biggest fears is just, you know, we had this kind of allotted time to really make the most of what we've been given and to sit back and reflect. I think that that's healthy, but only to a certain extent.
For sure.
And so.
Yeah, on that point, I've had this conversation with a few other artists because I'm always interested when an artist does so much in such a quick amount of time. Do they ever get to really enjoy it? And a lot of the times too, with speak with the new album, you know, sometimes when an album comes out, we don't even know how long that album took to come out. An artist could have been sitting on that for a year or two. So on that note too, with this new record, you know, with quarantine, did you guys have it completed prior, or were you guys working on it in this kind of new world we're currently in?
Yeah, so all the songs for Mama's Boy, they were all written in 2019, and we ended tour in August of last year and went to Nashville to start writing the album in September. So didn't take much time off at all, and I think we had the album pretty much completely written by November. And then we went straight to the studio for all of November and most of December. And then we went home for Christmas. So the way we do it is we kind of write the songs first, and then we go make the songs in the studio. And I remember being at East West, which is a studio in Hollywood, and the producer we were working with being like, this Corona thing feels like pretty serious. Yeah. Like, nah, come on. You know, we just had no. He's like, no, I think this is gonna like shut the world down. And he was right. I mean, you know, I think we worked all the way up until February, and then we were about 80%, I would say, 80% of the way done with the album. And then had to kind of stop and tried to work on it remotely via email, which just took forever and so inconvenient. But eventually we were able to get back in the studio and kind of like finish the final vocals for things and get it mixed to where we wanted it to. But I mean, I think even like the first month of quarantine, we still had an optimistic mindset. I'm like, we've got, you know, our first tour date for this year was supposed to be Vancouver, September 15th. And even like in March or April, we were still hoping that we would still be able to make that tour work. Yeah. How naive of us to think.
On that note, I interviewed this band just before Toronto went on emergency lockdown. And even talking about touring, even I didn't think, because we never really lived in a world where, you know, doing concerts was not possible. So even to someone who would say, you know, I think this is serious, we've never experienced no concert. So it's it was hard to even think about then. But again, on this new record, there's this idea of returning to your roots and that importance and wanting to expand and really grow with this record. With it being out in the world, how does it feel?
It feels great, man. I mean, we really wanted to get a top 10 album, which is something that we never have ever even gotten close to. And we wound up getting a number 7 and a number 1 on the alt chart. So, like, statistically, it was a humongous victory for us. But there is this lack of fulfillment for me, because to just work so hard on an album, put it on the internet, and just kind of walk away from it,
Yeah.
is a bizarre feeling. Because for me, what makes it all worth it is seeing how the songs translate live and seeing how much the music means to people in real life. I don't know if you've been to a LANY show, but if you have, that, like, I don't really even need to sing, because the whole crowd is just screaming every word back at me. And I miss that, and that's the most rewarding part of this job. So it feels awesome to put it out, but it also at the same time feels a little anticlimactic.
Was there any pushback on releasing the record in this time? Because I know, The Weeknd kind of famously said that he needed to give his album to the fans, even though a lot of people around him didn't want him to do that. He felt like it was necessary that in this time that we're in, even though there's so much bad things going on, at least fans can have music. Is that the way you kind of saw it too?
Yeah, I mean, I remember The Weeknd just kind of like putting the album out and unapologetically, like, and I can't believe that anyone would give him give him shit for that. To be honest, it makes absolutely no sense. And I mean, maybe they did in the beginning because they didn't realize how long that this was going to go on and how almost ridiculous, and it's getting to a point of absurdity. Like, we need to get back to work. We need to go back to work. Yeah. We need to move on, and we need people to do what they were created to do. So if that's to be a journalist, so ask the questions and do the interviews. If you're a doctor, like, go be a doctor and help people out. If you're a songwriter, go write your songs and be in your band and release your music. I mean, we need people to do what they were created to do, and for anyone to like think that someone should stop being who they are and who they're meant to be is kind of silly to me.
Yeah, because I couldn't. Now that with that album and even with your album, I can't imagine you guys holding on to that, knowing how good it is. It would have been hard to. So it's really good that artists still feel the need to put out their music out there. So for you guys, can you talk to me about some highlights? I know with no shows, but you guys toured so much. Are there any highlights you have, or places that you would like to tour when things do get back to normal?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's places that we haven't been yet, surprisingly, because I feel like we've been so many places, but still haven't played like South Africa, or, I would love to go and play like Egypt, or haven't been to Portugal yet. We haven't played Greece. There's a couple, like, I don't know if those are big markets or small markets or whatever. Love to go to the Middle East. We have this phrase for the world in this like LANY camp. Yeah. And so, we really take pride in going kind of where no man's gone before, like, which very few bands have played as many different places as us. And, that's the kind of band that we want to be. So I'm excited, and I'm trying to stay hopeful and optimistic that things will open back up again and we can get back to normal.
Yeah. Usually, when I get to my final question, I would ask an artist, how's the rest of the year looking? There's tours and all this stuff, but of course, because of COVID, I've had to change my last question. So
yeah.
For you, and particularly, from playing the piano growing up and getting into the music industry and releasing records, what's something for you throughout this journey that has been the most eye-opening, I guess, in terms of, growing up with the Chris Martins and seeing their world through the fans' lens? How has it felt for you as an artist? Has it been what you thought it would be, or what's been the most eye-opening?
I think, I'm learning a lot in real time because nobody has written a book on how to be a band, and every band has a different story and a different path and a different way of doing things. I've realized that the bigger you get, the more hate you get. I think there's been a few moments in time in this band where we put out something and then people just roasting us, or almost unnecessarily, and then we've looked at each other and go, oh wow, we're really getting bigger. Like, you only know if you're getting bigger when people start roasting. And that's really interesting because I'm a human being. I can be sensitive at times, and that shit hurts. But then you realize that, oh my God, I mean, like, if nobody's talking shit about your music, then nobody's listening to your music. So I learned that. I've also learned that you cannot please everybody. I've learned that you do have like this core fan base, right? A lot of times, if you left it up to that core fan base, they would want you to always do the same thing over and over and never get bigger, and so that they can keep you their little band. And as much as you love them, and that's sweet, you can't keep doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah, you have to.
So that's gonna piss some people off that potentially love you the most. I'm riffing here. I'm still figuring this whole thing out, but these are little lessons that I'm learning along the way. And like, you can't please everybody, and the bigger you get, the more people are gonna hate you. And so, just learning all that stuff, and I'm excited to. Somebody rang my doorbell. But yeah, I'm just excited to keep putting one step in front of the other.
That's perfect.
And just trying to get better every day.
Again, man, thank you so much for taking the time out for this interview. New album is amazing. Can't wait until the world gets back to normal, and I'll see you guys live in Toronto.
Yes, sir.
Take care for the rest of the day, man. Again, great album.
Thanks. Nice to meet you, dog.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks.
Studio One.